Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dave Munger. I'm the Executive Director Emeritus, which just means I'm retired, of the Council of Neighbors and Organizations. I'm glad Jeff found that funny. I'm very pleased to have you all here. Just a reminder, we're recording this session, so anyone you know, or if you want to refer to this later, it should be available from the cscono.org website. Also in our audience, also with us rather, is Richard Strasbaugh, our Chief Executive Officer of CONO. And Richard's going to wave his hand, so you're, in case you can't read for some reason the label on the screen. And then Lisa Bachman, who's the chair of our board, is also with us. And we have a few other members of the board that we will probably get to later. So Jeff Greene is the chief of staff, and also, I'm not sure this is part of the title yet, Jeff, or not, but also the principal administrator for the city of Colorado Springs. And Amy Folsom, whom I first knew, actually I first knew Jeff when he was in Amy Folsom's position. Amy is the county administrator for El Paso County, and I first met her when she was the attorney for the county. We've all worked together for some time, I think. It's great to have you both here. We're going to start with Amy's presentation, and we will hold off questions until the end of her presentation. We might have time for a question or two right after that, but Jeff has a hard 11 o'clock meeting, so we want to get to him pretty quickly. All right, Amy, thank you again for joining us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for that nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And Dave, I think you've got my...
It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
And your slideshow should be coming up very quickly.
And folks, I just have a very brief overview, kind of a little bit about government. I apologize in advance if it's a little simple, but I think sometimes it's important to really understand the basics and then to move into the more complex.
Okay.
Just a little bit about who we are and what we're doing right now. I'm not seeing it yet, Dave, do you? I'm sorry.
Okay, now you should be able to hear me.
I can hear you.
Go right ahead.
Great. I can't see the PowerPoint. Can everybody else?
No, I can't see it either.
That's not good. Let's see what's happening here.
Don't you just love this new way of communicating?
It's there we go. There we go.
There we are.
So thank you all once again. And thank you, Dave, for managing the PowerPoint. I was telling Dave I haven't really figured that one out yet. So I appreciate that. You know, when I was, for the benefit of those I don't know, when I was, you know, thinking about, okay, you know, asked to be doing an overview of county government, where do you even start? And when I look back at some of the old things that the county has done, you know, we're really heavily focused on the numbers. You know, how many roads do we have? How many lane miles do we pave? And it's occurred to me over the course of just the year that I've been in this position that, you know, is that really what we want folks to know about the county? isn't it more important to know, for folks to know about who we are as an organization, who we are as a culture? So I came upon a quote that I think encapsulates the message that at least I in county leadership, and I know a lot of our county leaders are trying to portray. Next slide, please, Dave. I just think this is a great quote. And it's from Martin Luther King Jr., which is particularly apt, I think, during this time. And it says, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? You know, again, and without being too cliche, I think, you know, a lot of us were privileged to be raised in communities and in families who emphasize service, who told us that it was important. But what a great and precious opportunity it is to do it not only in social life, but to be in public service as a vocation. So I guess on behalf, the message that I want, you know, anyone who's listening to hear is, this is what I see county folks doing day after day after day. For much of the 3,500 folks who work at the county, this is not a job, it is a vocation. It's a vocation founded in public service. So next slide, please. Next, yeah. So what I always ask folks to remember about the county, what distinguishes us, what makes us special. Two main things to remember. El Paso County serves everyone. And what do I mean by this? It's fundamental to those of us who have had the benefits of civics classes. You know, political subdivisions have jurisdictional boundaries. The county is unique in that regardless of what municipality you live in El Paso County, the county exists to serve you. There are no school district boundaries. School districts exist to provide fundamental and fair service to their constituents. Municipalities do the same. We have the unique story in that we serve everyone. I think the other thing that makes El Paso County unique is that we exist to protect our most vulnerable populations. Colorado government is structured such that I submit, and municipalities and other organizations do wonderful things, but at a fundamental level, El Paso County exists to protect our most vulnerable populations. And I think these two realities really do guide our approach to governance. Next slide, please. So what do I mean when I talk about El Paso County serves everyone? I started at the county 24 years ago. I was a district attorney for 13 years, transitioned into the county attorney's office, and then into this position. So I've had an extraordinary experience at the county, but I have to confess at each level that I've been able to serve, I am struck by the depth and the breadth of what the county does. We serve everyone in terms of property assessments, elections. The coroner doesn't care whether somebody passes in the city or the county. The district attorney prosecutes folks who are arrested in the city, who have committed crimes in the city as well as in the county. And some of the services that we provide, adult protection services, child protection services, workforce center, which is integral, especially now in connecting folks who have lost their jobs with job seekers. We provide pretrial services. We're instrumental in helping keep folks who can stay out of the jail, who have committed low-level crimes, from the jail. Public health, I'll talk about here in a second, and veteran services. We exist to serve those in our population who may not be able to protect themselves. Next slide, please. Oops, though. In addition to everything that other jurisdictions do, we've got our Department of Public Works and our 2,000 lane miles of roads and bridges. We are currently engaged in a very heavy push towards responsible land use planning in unincorporated El Paso County and working closely with the city in efforts to do so. And I'm happy to speak more to that, but it gets more detailed. We have a very robust economic development department and small business development department who are working very diligently in these times, to address the crisis that we're in. We also have a wonderful public information office that exists to try to get the word out about the great services that the county does. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about protecting the vulnerable. I guess I can't emphasize that enough. I think over the course of the last number of years, it's this really protective side of the county, this idea that the county wants to have a personal relationship with constituents and that the county exists fundamentally to serve has really started coming to the forefront and really been something that the county is trying to let citizens know about. Victims of abuse. You know, I don't know that most folks know we've got county attorneys in the courts every single day dealing with drug addicted families, dealing with kids who are being abused, making day-to-day decisions about whether to keep a child in a home, at what risk and at what cost, or about whether to remove the home. I've talked about our elderly folks, neglect cases. We've got an Adult Protection Services Department who responds to concerns about elderly abuse. Our Sheriff's Office certainly exists to provide community and public safety, but some of you may have heard about their Beacon Unit, a wonderfully successful program where not only do sheriff's officers respond to folks who are in mental health crisis, but they do so with a mental health professional. And especially in these times, I think we need to have the front face of even our law enforcement to express compassion, to express kindness, to express support. So I can tell you that I can see folks work day in and day out to help with a level of unmatched service. Next slide, please. And how do we do it? We've got 5 elected county commissioners who represent the county. They're elected for 2 4-year terms, 5 different districts kind of spread out around the county. And I can tell you, I've had the privilege of working with each of these folks for a couple years now. I would not have taken this job but for the constitution of this board. I think they are to a person generous. I think they are to a person. I've heard them say on numerous occasions, it's my job to give them advice. Amy, what's the right thing to do? And boy, that's a great position to be in. Next slide, please. So the Board of County Commissioners, there's a lot of confusion about, you know, what my role is. My role is actually a statutory position. They have the statutory ability to appoint a county administrator to administer county administration. Next slide, please. Try to get through quickly and make sure we got plenty of time. So here's a quick slide that, you know, I did to help best describe what it is that I do. My mom keeps calling me the county coordinator, which is not actually correct, but in some ways describes it a little better than administrator. So top left is your Board of County Commissioners. As I've already stated, they have the statutory authority to appoint a county administrator. The next set of departments are our administrative departments that are externally facing, our Department of Human Services, Public Works, etc. County administration also provides the infrastructure for the folks on the right, our countywide elected officials, our assessor, treasurer, coroner, DA, etc. So I exist to administer about 1,700 of the 3,500 employees that we have, that's on the left, and also spend loads of time interfacing with our other elected officials. Next slide, please. So I want to touch on COVID response. You know, Dave, you asked kind of, you know, what's going on at the county now, and I'm sure it's similar at the city. COVID response is what's going on at the county, in addition to providing all the fundamental services I've already talked about. So just a few quick points on that. Next slide, please. So we really, you know, tasked ourselves with leading the response, recovery, and resiliency to this unprecedented pandemic. El Paso County Public Health, I'm sure you've heard, I hope you've heard a lot about them and from them. They have been on this since the very beginning. I was on a policy call earlier today. They are on it still today. They happy to report, just as an aside, our numbers look very, very good. I think the governor's office has a trigger of cases per 100,000 folks. The trigger is at 100 cases per 100,000 folks over 14 days. I heard this morning that we're at 28.8, which I think is a fantastic number. They are doing an extraordinary job. Next slide, please. So county services quickly adapted. Folks often ask me, hey, what happened when all this went down and when the governor ordered everybody home? I am very proud and humbled to be able to say that our folks quickly adapted. We maintained not only essential services, but many non-essential services. The only things we couldn't do were things like the nature center and things that involved crowds. But we quickly went into remote work, still are about 60% remote work for some period of time. And again, are operating very, very effectively. I'm also proud to say our county safety net held. DHS stepped in, revamped their services, and made sure that as people lost their jobs and families were in need, that those services were provided. Same with our veterans, same with our workforce center. Next slide, please. Also wanted to comment on the CARES funding. As a population center greater than 500,000, El Paso County did apply for and receive $125 million in federal CARES funds. That was an extraordinary benefit from the federal government. I'm also very happy to report that immediately, within a couple of weeks, we worked with the municipalities without any mandate. It was great to see our folks in action. The question was, again, Amy, what's the right thing to do with this money? We distributed nearly half of it immediately to municipalities. Interestingly, this cannot be used to offset revenue losses that I'm sure we'll talk about, but is to be used directly for COVID-19 response. So that has been a welcomed pot of money. El Paso County has dedicated nearly $10 million directly to our local economic development of those CARES funding, and we're doing our best. We've got several programs going on right now to get that out. Next slide, and I think I'm done. So I was asked about county challenges, and I'm sure we'll get into this. Governments all across the country are anticipating tax revenue reductions for 2020 and beyond. El Paso County is subject to TABOR requirements, so we're expecting a ratchet down effect that will affect things in the future, devaluation of some property. And we're also, I think it'll be a challenge with the new workforce, the expectations of the workforce, fears, desires. I think we were talking a little bit before, the word new normals may be a little overused, but I don't know how else to say it. But I think the county needs to be poised to be there to lead and to support. So thank you. Those are the end of my opening comments.
And I think, Amy, can you hear me, Amy? All right, I think we'll defer questions and given the time frame, let Jeff talk now. And Jeff, you're on.
Well, thank you. First of all, Dave, Richard, Lisa, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to speak with you today. I just want to say, yes, the county has done an extraordinary job during this national emergency and pandemic. And the county is our regional government. All the municipalities within the county are very fortunate to have the relationship that we do and the collaboration that has existed. As Amy was talking about the CARES funding, I just want to emphasize, some of the counties in the state were not as generous in working with the municipalities. And so for the county to immediately contact the city and to work with us with a financial distribution has been very beneficial to us. Most of the CARES funding is allocated to public safety and addressing the COVID environment. As I would say earlier, El Paso County is a regional government. It's a statutory county. The city of Colorado Springs is a home rule municipality. And a lot of people really don't understand the difference between a statutory local government or a home rule local government. And a statutory government is responsible and has the confines to follow the requirements as defined in the Colorado Revised Statutes and all the codes and regulations associated with that. With a home rule entity, we actually have our own constitution, which is the city charter. And so that is the governing document. And then of course we have city codes and regulations that enhance the aspects of the city charter. And so all of our rules and regulations on how we govern ourselves, from the responsibilities of police and fire, to planning, to neighborhood services, to code enforcement, to parks. All that's defined through the city charter and our city codes. And as a home rule entity, we're very protective of that status. And so as we're working very closely with the state and the federal government, we try to always ensure that we're doing everything possible to preserve the status of being home rule. And it also allows us a greater level of opportunity to be able to do certain things. When you're a statutory organization, you have the benefits of the support from the state as it relates to rules and regulations, but at the same time, it can be more confining versus being home rule. And I am spending just a little bit of time talking about home rule, but I just want to stress the importance of that. One of the questions that was asked of me, several years ago, is it really that much different going from being the county administrator to being the chief of staff? And there's not. There's a lot of similarities associated with that, but there's a lot of differences. I'm the chief of staff to the mayor, but I'm also the chief administrator for the city itself. And so I have the pleasure on behalf of the mayor to be able to manage the city administration and work with some very incredible individuals, both within the city and also within the community. And it's all of us working together on how we make very positive things happen. But when you look at the organization of the city, you have city administration, which is comprised of, the normal departments that we're all familiar with. We have planning and development. We have public works, parks and recreation. The city also has various enterprises. We have a parking system enterprise. We have support services, human resources, finance. We also have a very robust economic development department. Information technology plays a major role. And one of the things that we've had a great emphasis in the last few years is how we look at innovation and how we look at technology. How do we look at smart cities and the role that the city will play as it relates to the evolution of our smart cities. Also, we have a municipally owned airport. Having a municipally owned airport in some jurisdictions, they're regional airports. When you look at regional airports, there's a relationship between the municipalities and the counties. With the city of Colorado Springs, we are a municipally controlled airport. We do have the designation as we're the second largest airport in the state of Colorado. One of the things that I would never be able to survive on a daily basis is the relationship that we have with our city attorney's office. Our city attorney's office has several roles. They provide the civil advisement to the city administration, to the mayor, and to the city council. Also, they have the responsibility for prosecution. And so we have our own municipal courts. And the chief judge has a relationship as the chief judge. He reports directly to the mayor, but as the judicial administrator, he reports to the chief of staff. We also have, I believe, one of the highest accredited police and fire departments in the country. We're very proud of our accreditations. We're very proud of the training that occurs with both our police and fire. And, during this time of unrest, what we've been very proud of is how our police department has responded and how we're collaborating. And I will talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the presentation. And as a city organization, we have a responsibility to ensure that number one is the public safety and welfare of our community, but also our relationship to work very closely with our other municipalities and in our county. And the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, which is another regional government, is an organization in which the cities and the counties work very closely, not only with El Paso County, but Teller County as well, on how we look at our transportation planning, how we look at the planning and growth overall for the Pikes Peak region, and the product of that was the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority, which is another regional entity that came together. Mr. Munger, you were very much involved in that process many years ago, and we were very successful in the passage and the establishment of the PPRTA. And with the result of the PPRTA, we have addressed our regional transportation needs of this region. And we look forward to the success of PPRTA 3. And one of the things that's very interesting is we were looking at addressing the transportation infrastructure of our region and the requirements associated with it, but the design, the building and implementation of these transportation improvements. But there's also been an evolution of how we look at this and how we look at smart cities and a intermodal relationship. There's a lot of things associated with that we have to be very, very sensitive to. I think one of the things that we have to be very sensitive to is our planning and community development of the city itself. The city for many years was very focused on raw land development within the incorporated boundaries. The city went through a series of major annexations over time. One of the things that I'm most proud of was the amendment and the restatement of the Banning Lewis Ranch annexation. That was annexed, the process started in the mid-1980s. It was annexed by the city of Colorado Springs in 1988. It was approximately around 24,000 acres. And today, we've had a major development process that relates to Banning Lewis Ranch. And a lot of people only see Banning Lewis Ranch as a major development project. In the mayor's words, how the city and the county and the urban development that occurred around it, Banning Lewis Ranch actually became one of the largest infill projects for the city of Colorado Springs. And so the reason I really want to stress this is as we look at the growth and the future development of the city, Banning Lewis Ranch will play a major role. The Southern Delivery System, which is one of the largest conveyance of water in the state of Colorado, was primarily built to support the growth and development of Banning Lewis Ranch. And so some of the things that the city is going to be very focused on in the future is planning and development. We passed and it was approved by the city council with the support of the mayor, was Plan COS, which was a major comprehensive planning aspect of the city itself. A lot of processes, stakeholder discussions occurred, a lot of interaction with our public, a lot of support from our public, and we were very proud to see that Plan COS was adopted by our city council. And with that, there are aspects of Plan COS are derivatives of Plan COS that we're now focusing on. One is a complete overhaul of our land development codes. We refer to it as Chapter 7 of the city code. And with Chapter 7, that really outlines, the zoning aspects of the city, the planning requirements of the city, and so forth. So our next major project as it relates to Plan COS is Retool COS. And this will be the process of updating our zoning and our subdivision codes for the city itself. Also, the next thing that we're tackling at this point in time is we haven't updated our transportation plan for the city in almost 20 years. So it's an intermodal mobility plan, which is Connect COS. And we're doing this in conjunction with the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, PPACG. And they're looking at overall at a regional transportation plan. But with the city of Colorado Springs, we're almost 250 square miles. So we are the largest municipality within El Paso County. And so there's a great deal of importance as it relates to the role that the city will play in the regional transportation aspect, but also how we're looking at the city itself. And so with Connect COS, that's going to be a major undertaking for the city. And it's also how we're going to look at the transportation infrastructure needs of the city for the next 20 years. Neighborhood planning is very, very important, and the role that Kono plays in supporting the city. As we're looking at, and I said earlier, the city was very focused on raw land development. Today, there's a major emphasis on infill development. There's major areas of the city that never developed over time. There were issues associated with the development processes. There were aspects that proved to be too costly at that point in time for those areas of the city to effectively develop. But as the city has grown, as we've seen changes in technology, as we've seen changes in development practices, there's been a major emphasis on infill. And there's been a lot of success stories associated with some of these infill projects. And also we have a responsibility as we look at the inner city itself. There are aspects of the city that primarily developed in the 1950s through the 1970s. Some of those areas that there needs to be a major emphasis on redevelopment activities associated with that. And also with neighborhood planning is also being very sensitive to the neighborhood environment. Cultures have established and come about from the relationships that neighborhoods have developed over time. And so as the city is looking at redevelopment of the city itself, and also as we're looking at future annexations, it's very, very important that we take into account the specific cultures that have been created and originate in certain areas of the city. Another area of the city that we have to be super sensitive to is attainable housing plan, home COS, major emphasis as it relates to affordable housing. And so we're very pleased that the mayor has signed off on a new program. We have an affordable housing plan for the city, which is home COS. I mentioned before about some smart cities initiatives. One of the things that there's going to be a lot of time stressed by the city is smart COS. So I think you see a theme here is everything that we're doing has the end of COS. And so smart COS is going to be really a great emphasis on how we're looking at the cities of the future. One of the areas that's going to have a major impact as it relates to smart city planning is the redevelopment of Southwest downtown. That's been a major initiative that the city, in partnership with the county, in partnership with our largest developer here in our community, Norwood Development Group, is the redevelopment of a major area of the city. This plan was originally envisioned in the late 1990s, and we now are realizing the concepts that were originated at that point in time, and there's been an evolution in the change to that. But as it relates to the Southwest downtown redevelopment process, is that the key to it is we're looking at our development practices, is how do you increase your value per acre? And a large part of that is how you look at your density. And so one of the things is we're looking at the infrastructure needs of the city, as we're looking at the cost to maintain our infrastructure, it's very important that we look at the density requirements associated with that. And we want to promote higher areas of density within the city. And then that leads us going into our annexation planning. And Amy mentioned this earlier about the relationship between the city and the county and the partnership associated with that. The city does still need to annex. And one of the things that's become very realistic is that when we look at our sales tax base, and the city is very dependent upon sales tax as a major component of our revenue. Unlike the county, we have a very low property tax base. And so when I first started with the city of Colorado Springs, almost 20% of our total revenue was associated with property tax. Today, it's less than 10% of our total base of revenue is associated with property taxes. And so when you look at annexations, one of the things that we're finding is that you have increases of online retail. And so individuals are acquiring goods and services online. They're paying for those services and goods online. And so there's still going to be a very specific need for brick and mortar, but we've seen this evolution of where individuals are actually spending more dollars, especially in this COVID environment, with online sales. And so we have to be very sensitive that when you look at the transaction itself, the tax implication is associated with the residential address. And so when we look at the needs of the city, you know, I always talk about that we're chasing, you know, our sales tax, we're chasing retail, is that we have to be very, very sensitive to, you know, what's happening. And the appropriate thing is look at our annexations. The Southern Delivery System, which was built through one of our largest city enterprises, which is Colorado Springs Utilities, was intended to provide that support for Banning Lewis Ranch. But also SDS has the ability to provide water conveyance as it relates to future annexations. And one of the things that we've been working very closely with the county is a joint initiative between the city of Colorado Springs and Colorado Springs Utilities, is a new planning area for the city that will basically outline how the city is going to grow over the next 50 to 100 years. As Amy mentioned earlier, the responsibility that we have in administering COVID, and I cannot say enough as it relates to the El Paso County Public Health Department. They have been a great partner. They've worked very closely with the mayor and myself and the staff to address the needs of our community. And they've been very responsive. They've been very proactive in managing the pandemic. But we also recognize that with this pandemic, most governmental jurisdictions have incurred major revenue losses. And so when you look at our proposed 2020 budget that was proposed by the mayor to the city council, that was approved by the city council, we were projecting somewhere around $310 million in revenue. Based upon the impact of the pandemic, we're projecting that our new budget for the city itself is somewhere between $275 to $280 million. And so we've been working very closely and projecting approximately around a $38 million loss in our revenue base for the city. So with that, we've had to take certain measures to ensure that we're providing the mandated services by the city. But one of the things that we had a great emphasis on is to be very careful in how we're managing the services and the programs as it relates to our public. Before, with the Great Recession, the city made certain decisions that were very impactful to the public. This time around, we've been very, very sensitive to look at those programs and services, so there's very little or no impact to the public. And as it relates to the management of the pandemic, the relationship, and one of the things that's been very important is the regionalization of our Office of Emergency Management. There's been great success as it relates to communication strategies, how we're effectively communicating with the public, but also how we're managing resources and addressing the needs specifically of the city and the county. The city itself cannot stand alone without the support of the services that come from El Paso County. And with the city, you know, we have a police and fire department that's been very involved in the management of the COVID situation, but also our relationship through this regionalization of emergency management has improved our ability to address the needs of the public itself and the partnership with public health. I could talk for hours about some of the specific initiatives the city has been undertaking. Just recently, we approved accessory dwelling units. A lot of discussion, some controversy associated with it. But I believe with the policy direction that's been supported by the mayor and by the city council, we feel very, very comfortable with the new policy direction. And then we'll be spending time to evaluate this very specific policy direction. But as I said, we could not have done this alone, not without the support, especially of KONO, and working very closely with us. And also KONO has been very active in supporting the master planning for the city and also for the overhaul of our land development codes itself. So David, I could talk far more about very specific initiatives, but I'll turn it off at this point.
Thank you, Jeff, not for turning it off, but thank you for what you said and for your nice words about KONO. I have a question for both of you. that I think is somewhat tied into what's happening currently. There's some discussion, apparently significant discussion at the state level about the Gallagher Amendment. I wonder if Amy and Jeff, if you'd care to say what you feel the county and the city's positions are regarding the Gallagher Amendment.
You know, I would defer to Amy first because there's a far greater impact as it relates to the property tax situation with the county, and also with the fire districts themselves. And then I'll be willing to tune in.
Sure, we certainly have our eye on the issue, Dave, and you know, while sales tax and drops in immediate spending are having immediate effects on our budget, we're really concerned about our future years, our 2022, 2023, 2024, as anticipated. Property values decline. The Gallagher Amendment drives assessments rates down, and our property tax revenues will go down in those future years. I didn't say that very artfully. So we're kind of feeling like we're dealing in the here and now with sales tax, but our big punch, if changes aren't made, will come in upcoming years.
And Dave, what I would say is, as it relates to there's no question that Gallagher has, it's preserved and protected the residential property owners, and especially as the demographics reflect this, the changes in our demographics and with seniors and who have fixed incomes, and the importance of Gallagher as it relates to, you know, ensuring a process in which they can manage and effectively, you know, pay their property taxes. But there has to be some type of reform as it relates to Gallagher. I mean, both the city and the county have seen the impacts, but also Gallagher has been somewhat devastating as it relates to commercial development. As we look at commercial property values, corporate property values, and compared to residential, you know, it's a barrier to some extent to economic development. There has to be some changes as it relates to Gallagher. And as we're talking about the impacts to our revenue base, Gallagher plays a role, but also Tabor. And there's no question that Tabor has been very, very restrictive. I will say, I think that when you look back over the last 20 years, the state of Colorado has benefited from the protections of Tabor. We feel very strongly that if you're looking at increasing taxes, you should ask the citizens the question, do you support this? And Tabor provides those protections. But what's happened, though, is over time, is that when you have economic downturns, and this is an artificial economic downturn as a result of the pandemic, it is affecting our tax base. And with that, with this change, I mean, it is a substantial, dramatic change that our organizations are incurring, is that our property taxes and sales taxes, and I should say, restate that, our sales taxes have changed substantially, and that, you know, we're projecting major losses in sales taxes. And so when you start having a rebound, and as the economy starts returning and recovering, is that, you know, we're going to be set with a lower base. So you have that ratchet effect. And so the mayor has proposed, we've had a work session to the city council. The majority of our city council members are supportive of a Tabor question in which that we can preserve our the baseline of our tax base over a particular period of time, and that we don't experience the same type of ratchet effect. With the success of our economy, both municipally and regionally, is that both our organizations have experienced the Tabor issue, and it's the Tabor revenue issue. And so both organizations have asked Tabor retention questions over the last 5 years. But we're also going to be in a situation that if we don't address the Tabor cap, it's going to have devastating impacts to our organizations. What we're anticipating is that if we don't address the Tabor cap issue, the city if we want, if to return back to the baseline of revenue, 2019 was our best year ever. If we look at that particular change, it could have as much as almost a $44 million loss in revenue for the city itself as the economy is recovering. And so when you look at both these issues, Gallagher, we have to do something about Gallagher. Tabor is something that is much more of a impact to the city and to the county. I do want to still emphasize the importance of Tabor itself, is that the responsibility we have to go back to our citizens, to ask them very specific questions as it relates to the retention of revenue, and also as it relates to the increase in taxes, is something that we should follow and abide by.
And Dave, I'll echo those comments on Tabor. Ditto on the whole Tabor conversation. It's a big issue. Oop, I can't hear.
Is David still there?
Mm-hmm.
So while we're trying to get Dave back, Jeff and Amy, I guess I'd like to ask you both a question as it pertains to the southeast area of town. You know, Jeff, you mentioned cultural changes in neighborhoods that have been happening for many years. But can you both address a little bit about where you see the city and county's role in the southeast area moving forward? And what are some of the initiatives that you think are being very beneficial for the residents of that part of town?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Lisa.
And then what bank is this with?
As far as the city's concerned, I think we have a responsibility to address the needs of all of our geographic areas of the city itself. But it's a very specific area. There's been a lot of emphasis is on the southeast. The southeast was one of the first areas of the city to develop back in the 60s and the 1970s. I believe that at this point in time, we're looking at redevelopment opportunities, but we have to be very sensitive as we look at redevelopment opportunities. We want to encourage economic investment. When you look at the amount of infrastructure, the investment infrastructure in the southeast, the city's committed to almost $60 million in infrastructure improvements. Also, the city's been looking at ways on how we revitalize certain areas. And there's still infill areas of the southeast. There's been projects approved recently by the city in which you will have infill development and construction, which will increase the tax base for that particular area. But also we have a responsibility to look at, you know, the southeast in itself. When you look at the public health aspects of it, one of the things that Councilmember Avila constantly reiterates to us is when you look at the quality of life for our city, to quote the good council member, is that when you look at the average age and longevity of individuals, is that people in the southeast live on average 16 years less than other areas of our city. That's an issue. And so I've been working very closely. Former Chancellor Pam Shockley-Zalabak has been facilitating discussions. She's been working very closely with some very motivated community leaders. Pastor Ben Anderson has been working very closely with us through the Solid Rock Church. They've established the Solid Rock Development Corporation. And I think there's things that we can really do as it relates to our neighborhoods, as it relates to development and redevelopment opportunities that we have to be very serious about. And the one thing we have to be very mindful about as we're looking at these opportunities is being very sensitive to the culture and the neighborhoods of that specific area. As one of the oldest areas of our city, I would say area that really developed during the mid to late 20th century, is that you have very defined, established cultures there that we have to be respectful of. And as we're looking at these changes, to understand how these changes are going to impact these neighborhoods. And, you know, at one point in time, you know, the development process of any major city was you have to build this massive infrastructure to address transportation. Today, you're looking at a mix of how you look at addressing the transportation needs of a growing region, but also how do you provide that pedestrian friendliness? How do you provide areas that the walkability aspect? And so as we've been looking at major redevelopment projects or new development projects within the city itself, is what is the walkability associated with that? And so as we're looking at the Southeast, there's components that we have to work very closely as it relates to the environment. One of the things that, you know, when you look at the average temperature in our city, you know, in the Southeast, the temperature scale is degrees higher in the Southeast than it is in other areas of the city. One of the reasons is, as I stated previously, is the amount of concrete and asphalt you have in that particular area, the infrastructure associated with it that was built, you know, anywhere from 30 to 60 years ago. And there's less trees there. But as we look at some of our strategies on redevelopment of our major parks in that area, the building of new parks, but also a commitment by the city to plant more trees, to be more sensitive to that particular environment. And the one thing I really want to stress is that it is a partnership in which the citizens of the Southeast are developing and defining what their plan is. It is not the city going into and say, hey, this is what you have to do, or we have the best answer. It is the city being a partner and listening to those specific needs and those individuals of this area of our city defining their strategy and the city being very supportive of that.
Thanks, Jeff. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I appreciate what you said about that. And I know Richard and I and the rest of the board agree that that's something we think Kono can be really helpful with in helping neighborhoods to have articulate voices that present their own points of view and their own interests. Carl Schuler wanted to follow up with something you said, Jeff.
Yeah, hi all, this is Carl, and I just joined. I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
I just joined this really to amplify and follow up on what Jeff said. One thing we are working on is our first neighborhood plan, which will be in the southeast area of the city. We call it our Southeast Community Plan. We've already been working with Richard and Stephanie in particular about brainstorming on how to best do that process. And I just caught the end of it, as Jeff had indicated, we have some challenges with budgets and with COVID and all that stuff. And a lot of you know Hannah Van Nimwegen, and Hannah is our PM on that project. And because of, frankly, the development review process not having slowed down very much, but the budget limitations we have, she's going to have to be spending a significant amount of her time just handling all of our regular development review stuff. But we haven't lost sight of the work we're doing on the Southeast Plan. Matter of fact, she and I will be meeting later today just to work on some of the next steps of that process. So it's going to take a little longer than we'd like, but we're already working with Kono on trying to put everything in place to do a really good Southeast Community Plan. One more quick detail, we've done a lot of reports. You may have seen that Hannah, if you haven't already, you will very soon, that Hannah did a really nice job on our Plan COS annual report that was presented to Jeff, Mayor, Council, Planning Commission. We've also done some other reports on all the different things we're doing in development, in Peter's department. But typically we do this report on the Academy Boulevard corridor, and I've pulled the plug on that because of staffing resources, and we'll do it on a 2-year basis instead of a 1-year basis, so we can put the limited resources we have into that Southeast Plan. And again, we're working very closely with Kono and a lot of the other stakeholders in that process. So just wanted to let you know that that's one more thing we're doing.
Thanks, Carl. And I think Stephanie wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, thanks,
Stephanie, I
Dave.
think you're unmuted.
Yep. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dave. And thanks, Jeff, for the information, and Amy also for the information. It's really valuable. As Dave mentioned, I'm the program officer at Kono. And I had a question. I actually two questions, one for Jeff and then maybe later one for Amy. Jeff, I know you kind of touched upon this already a little bit in answering Lisa's question, but I wanted to hear, I was hoping you could tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit about more of the changes that are taking place with retool and the zoning codes, and how they're affecting, bigger issues such as affordable housing, and how they relate to like the home COS plan, for example.
Well, there's no question that they're all interrelated. And I apologize, I'm gonna have to depart here in just about 90 seconds. What I would say is one of the things that I really have focused on and working very closely with Steve Posey, who's our community development manager, as well as Mr. Wysocki, who is our director of planning and community development, is how we look at providing incentives for certain types of development. How do we look at incentives for affordable housing? And the one thing we have to be very, very sensitive to in our environment is that when we look at fees and changes in our construction codes, our development codes, is we have to be sensitive what those impacts are going to be to the cost of development, to the cost of construction. And so when you look at our building codes and the costs and changes associated with it, the fees required to support those programs, is that how do we look at a comprehensive incentive program that incorporates not only the city itself, but Colorado Springs Utilities, and how this is integrated. And I could probably spend about half an hour on that particular question. And Dave, what I would recommend is maybe we can do some additional podcast as it relates to certain policies of the city and the county. One of the things I think is of importance is special districts and how we look at the use of districts and so forth. But Dave, it's been a pleasure talking to everybody, and I do have to depart at this time.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm sorry, you've got to go.
Jeff, thank
Amy,
you so much.
Amy, can you stay with us a while?
I've got about 5 more minutes, so I'm happy to.
Okay, so Stephanie, why don't you ask your question of Amy? And
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, real quick, Amy, I really liked how you highlighted the partnership between the sheriff's office and kind of addressing those larger like mental health issues and what you've done for that. Can you give us any other examples about how the county and their departments, is partnering right now or in the future to address, some of the larger issues like, once again, mental health, addiction, homelessness, childhood obesity, those types of things?
Sure. One extraordinary example, I think a lot of you have heard, happened just in recent years. I don't know if you remember a couple years ago, I hear the tagline, El Paso County was making the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Our teen suicides rates were through the roof and just disproportionate to our population. So it really was an extraordinary effort between the Public Health Department, Leon Kelly. If you don't know Leon Kelly in this community, get to know him. He's our elected coroner. He's an extraordinary physician. He's an extraordinary community leader. They organized a group of county officials, incorporated city folks, worked with school districts, worked with the Colorado Springs Conservatory to really develop a program, not only that was based out of county offices, but that they actually took into schools and developed an educational, it was actually a musical snippets that they took into schools, in addition to lots of community organizations or community participation, and had a truly pragmatic effect in driving down our teen suicide rates, where they've stayed pretty consistent with, one teen suicide is too many. But that's really been just a glorious example. In addition to the Beacon unit, like the city, we're continuously having conversations about homeless issues, what the county can do to support. For better or worse, much of the much of those issues are in the city and not in the county. So we are really looking for ways to support our city counterparts in effectively addressing some of those issues.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah.
Amy,
Thank you.
that's awesome. And I'll say, if no one has seen the Colorado Springs Conservatory presentation of Jack,
Jack, I can
the
remember.
musical Amy's referring to, so please try to go see it. Linda Weiss has done an amazing job.
And Richard Strasbaugh has a question.
Thanks for coming and presenting to us, Amy. We really appreciate it. Looking ahead 5-10 years, what are your 1 or 2 big goals down the road?
1 or 2 big goals, and then they're going to be lofty. We've actually spent some time on this. So, you know, I'll echo Jeff's comments on preparing our region to be a smart community. As you know, that conversation is evolving so quickly. It's an effort in and of itself to stay on top of it. But I think the county's got to be part of that conversation going forward. I came on board about a year ago in this position, and one of my big focuses the last year, and certainly going forward, is to make this county a more strategic organization. And you know, we hear that cliche bounced around all the time, but it's fundamentally important when you're performing local government services. For many, many years, and especially through 2009, the Great Recession, the county was reactive, right? You get in a buck, you figure out where to spend that buck. I think we're, you know, we've got great folks on board. We're retraining and re-cueing how we think going forward in terms of not just getting out in front of issues in the short term, but really defining a vision for where we want to be as a regional leader in the county. Again, not a lot of specifics, but I think we have to start with that loftier goal and then build the elements towards that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My connectivity is sort of declining here. Richard, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So I think we have kept Amy a little bit long as well. I'll say thanks again for being part of this, Amy. I really appreciate your taking the time. I hope that you will be aligned with Jeff on the possibility of some additional webcasts to follow up on a few topics.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. Nice to see you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks.
Amy.
I will conclude by telling you that we have some more of these webcasts. On June 24th, Brett Lacey, who is the fire marshal for Colorado Springs, will be talking with us. And given that this is the start of our traditional fire season, which seems to get longer all the time, but he should have some very interesting things to say to us about how we keep the community safer. And on the 29th, we will have some other folks from the city and the county, in particular, the president of the Board of County Commissioners, Commissioner Mark Waller, the president of the City Council, Richard Scorman, and then a member of the City Council, also a fairly influential guy, Wayne Williams. Those three will join us for a good conversation, I think. And then we're going to take something of a break for most of July. And on the 30th of July, Aram Benyamin, did I say that correctly, Lisa? Who is the CEO.
I'm sure he won't argue with you in however you pronounce his name. I think you did well.
I hate to, thank you. Anyway, he is the CEO of Colorado Springs Utilities, and they're doing some awfully important work, obviously, but they also have some interesting plans for the future. So he will join us for a good conversation on July 30th, and those are all 10 or 10:30. And since Jeff was good enough to volunteer and Amy agreed, I think we'll look at some additional webcasts on some of these, some topics of interest to us all. And I plan to ask County Coroner, Dr. Kelly, if he would join us for one as well. If you've got any other suggestions or have some questions for me, I will stay on this until we're all done, unless someone wants to bring up something for the general good at this point. Carl, go ahead.
It's a simple question. Have you taped these sessions?
We have. I announced that at the beginning. I'm sorry you missed that. But
Yeah, I missed all of it except for the last 5 minutes.
Sure, they're all available through our website, Kono website, cskono.org. Any other questions or comments? Hold on, Rainey, I'll give you, I'll unmute you here. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I came into the meeting late, so sorry about that. So I wondered, was there any discussion early on in the meeting about water COS?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Richard, can you respond?
No, there were other plans COS is discussed, but I don't believe we discussed water COS.
Well, I think the community is facing a significant water issue. I know on our HOA we have, and I think a lot of part of the city is facing water restrictions. We're down to 3 times a week between certain hours. Although if you drive down Nevada or Tejon or Cascade, you will see in the middle of the day the water sprinklers on. So I don't know what kind of restrictions they're facing. But with the development that's going on east of the city and the demands that we're going to have on water, I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And I don't know if that's something that Kono can ask, or I don't know if I'm in the ballpark. I think it's important because I think we're all going to be facing issues down the line if we don't face it.
That's a good point, Rainey. I think that Mr. Benyamin will address at least that, if not a lot of other things, when he talks with us on the 30th. But that's also something that you could bring up with at our 29th meeting, because June 29th meeting with Mr. Scarman and Mr. Williams and the CSU board of directors, so they'll have some things to say about that as well.
Thank you.
Anything else that someone would like to bring up? Okay, thank you all very much. If you have a private question or you want to hang on until we're all done here, I'm willing to stick around. But on this note, we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Well done.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
good day, everybody.